All right. Good morning, everybody. And good morning to those who are online. I realized that I didn't know that people would be joining online. It's wonderful to hear. So I think everything that has been said so far is actually exceptionally energizing and aligns really well with some of the elements that we discussed in the workshop in May. So I'm going to sort of very, very briefly summarize the discussion that we had and maybe provide some of my own remarks on the topic. I first would like to thank Justin Unworth from the Water Institute of the Gulf and also Nagin Sobhani from the Academies for this very kind invitation. The recognition of the multiple benefits of natural infrastructures have definitely increased over the past maybe several decades, and it's great to see this momentum building up quite a bit, particularly with the recent Biden-Harris announcement on the roadmap to unlock the full potential of nature-based solution to fight climate change. So leveraging this momentum in May, we convened a workshop at the University of Georgia, which was held by the National Academies at the request of the Army Corps of Engineering, to explore the benefits, applications, and opportunities of natural infrastructure. We had really an excellent workshop, excellent talks and discussions. And of course, the intent of the workshop was not to cover the wide variation and possibilities of what natural infrastructure, nature-based solutions would look like. Instead, what we wanted to do is to focus on discussing natural infrastructure efficacy in single and multi-hazard resilience, climate change adaptation, and sustainable multi-purpose infrastructure to both advance and mainstream natural infrastructure use and public and private engineering practices, both at a single structure level, which is very important, or single localized level, I should say, but also as well as a community scale. We discussed 4 themes that could provide a path forward towards facilitating a much wider use of natural infrastructure across the nation. We started with theme 1, which focused on the application of natural infrastructure, context, features, and benefits. And once we discussed these features and managed to convince ourselves of the benefits, which is, the few have been elaborated on already, it was logical to kind of talk about theme 2, which was on elements for implementation, including physical, social, ecological, and economic considerations. And once we discussed these considerations, it was very obvious now that there are things that we have to think about as we try to implement these projects. But then what would we need to do to really make timely progress? And that maybe whether through developing descriptive methods, manuals, and standards that don't necessarily have to take a very long time to develop, but maybe we can have descriptive methods that facilitate carrying out these projects at a larger scale. And that larger scale was very important because one of the things that we wanted to do is, which was theme 4, is to discuss how we can sync with policies through coordinated public and private partnership so we can scale things up. And by scale, we meant scaling at again, project level, but also across the nation. So we also recognize that blindly scaling up is not the answer. Using natural infrastructure instead of gray infrastructure is not the answer either. However, there's sufficient information and examples to push things forward with coordinated efforts on using natural infrastructure in combination with gray infrastructure, as I mentioned, as we build our damaged and deteriorated infrastructure in the US. If we really want sustainable and resilient solution, we have to really think about how we do that moving forward. Obviously, what we've been doing in the past hasn't worked very well for us, right? We recognize that there is tremendous amount of expenses and costs associated with deterioration of the infrastructure we're building, of how we protect it, and we have to change things moving forward. In the context of sustainability and resilience, extensive work has been done over the past 2 decades or so on coupling at different scale infrastructure, social, and economic systems. And there is actually quite a bit of literature on that. Initially by looking at socioeconomic impact following extreme events, and more recently trying to integrate these systems for resilience and recovery assessment. And resilience can mean different things to different people. In this context, I mean recovery following natural disasters. It could be the area under this recovery curve, if you would. The focus on coupling physical, social, and economic system has yielded significant dividends in advancing our understanding of what makes infrastructure, sectors, or communities more sustainable and resilient. However, we are yet to integrate natural ecological systems with the other three mentioned systems to really better understand how all pieces of the puzzle would fit together. You might ask, then, why haven't we done this? I don't know. Maybe lack of communication, lack of coordinated efforts, maybe policies are not necessarily matching in terms of how they're written and so on. There could be different reasons. What I do know, however, is that integrating ecological systems with physical, social, and economic systems is really key to understanding the trade-offs and alignments between sustainable and resilient solutions. And unless we do that, we really are not closing the loop on what the full picture would look like. So as the increase in population along the U.S. coastline continues moving forward, we have to look at alternative solutions for protecting coastal communities that are both environmentally friendly, which means sustainable, and effective in mitigating the impact of multiple hazards, and that would be resilient in this case. Nature-based solutions are considered viable for mitigating the impact of combined hazards, but we have not really measured what matters yet to be able to push their use forward. This is probably because initial cost has been driving the bus on how we make decisions on what works and what might not work. But we can no longer afford to think this way, in my opinion. Basing our decisions on initial cost obviously is not the answer. The impact of extreme events on climate change, driven in part by extensive use of gray infrastructure, we have to acknowledge that and understand that this is part of the problem. On different sectors, including ecological and environmental sectors, just think of the food we eat, the water we drink, and the air we breathe, right? Is obvious and cannot be ignored. Life cycle analysis can be used and offer a good mechanism to make sufficient business case for applying nature-based solutions to explore co-benefits of using nature-based solutions. With life cycle analysis tools, as an example, right, there could be different ways by which you can make decisions. Officials and policymakers can really start to look at alternatives for mitigating strategies based on trade-offs and alignments between sustainability and resilience, as I mentioned before, and also expected total life cycle cost associated with implementing nature-based solutions. These frameworks and the tools that would be associated with it can account for accurate response of the built environment and the proposed nature-based solution, because it is a structure, if you would, that has to be considered. And again, we can leverage ideas of what really matters in terms of measuring things to consider cost associated with the nature-based solution itself, residential buildings, for example, damage, including not only initial construction, but also routine maintenance, repair, reconstruction of physical system or the natural system. And the repair and recovery time can be integrated with the framework by assigning maybe penalty functions that allows you to kind of dismiss solutions that are relatively very expensive. And excuse me, we can push things further and include relevant socioeconomic costs, such as the cost of population relocation and temporary housing and rents. And once you've measured or established this framework, you can actually select optimal solutions that are subjected to relevant constraints to ensure that they are realistic in real situations. I just gave an example, and this is just a really simple example of what we might be able to measure or what might be easy to measure. But it's not necessarily an example of everything that could be measured that might have tremendous benefits. I think Todd mentioned this earlier, that there's incredible benefits. And if we convince everybody that this benefits is actually overwhelming in many ways, then maybe you can have this large movement of support behind implementing nature-based solutions. These feature elements can include biodiversity. I actually was at COP27 a couple of weeks ago, and it was really exciting to see the tremendous discussions, obviously, on nature-based solution and biodiversity as well. we had actually a panel that was focused on wildfires. And one of the presenters in our session had a tremendous presentation that talks about how vegetations that are burning in a wildfire event have tremendous benefits to the biodiversity for marine environment and looking at marine systems, including coral reefs. And just think about the possibilities, and I know we're not intending to make things complicated to moving forward, but think about the possibility of determining which type of vegetation that if you burn might actually not cause damage to the built environment in terms of the embers that are generated by these vegetations. You might even be able to protect some of the residential buildings using some vegetations. But the co-benefit of what that might do to the marine systems and marine environment in our oceans, there's tons of benefits that we have not looked at. There's also tremendous benefits associated with emerging disease and public health, and I was at the G7 summit on One Health in Canada, organized by the Royal Society, and they had tremendous discussion on that. There are different ways of making business case for nature-based solutions. There are endless, in my opinion. We just need to start somewhere. Thank you so much.